the theme of this thing is you have to give them a chance. The players went from 0-3 to 4-4. They are in this playoff race.
Trade deadline is now come and gone. The Vikings made a couple moves. So let's jump right into it. Want your reactions to what the Vikings did today, trading for Josh Dobbs after Kirk Cousins' season-ending Achilles injury last Sunday. What does this mean for the Vikings short-term and I guess long-term future?
Yeah, I think that this perfectly split the difference between really going for it and not doing anything at all. Josh Dobbs has experience in the league as a starter. He had to do it at the end of the year last year for the Tennessee Titans, and then he gets traded to the Arizona Cardinals right before the season, has to come out and play. And at the beginning of the season, played fairly well for Arizona, even had a great game against the Dallas Cowboys in which he completed 17 of 21 passes, ran for 55 yards, and pulled off a huge upset there. He has been playing under pretty poor circumstances, though, overall in Arizona. Just that lone win is the only one he's had so far, but it's going to be quite a change to go from that team to the Minnesota Vikings. And the idea is that if Jaren Hall does not take them anywhere and struggles as a starter, that they can bring in Josh Dobbs, knowing that he has that experience, knowing that he's been through it, to learn an offense quickly before, which I think is a massive challenge. But someone with Josh Dobbs's well-noted intellect that we hear every time he's on a broadcast, they talk about his educational background, but I'm sure it doesn't hurt when you're trying to learn something very complicated, process it, and then apply it on the field. But with Justin Jefferson likely to come back at some point pretty soon, the way that Jordan Addison's been playing, the offensive line has been terrific of late. There is an opportunity to give all of these guys a chance to win some games with a backup quarterback that they feel like they can elevate. And that goes for Kevin O'Connell and his scheme as well. So it does that while also giving up virtually nothing, a pick swap, a sixth for a seventh. So nothing really given up there. They could have chased other more experienced quarterbacks, but if you're those teams with, say, Andy Dalton on your roster, what are you going to do? You're going to hike up the price, right? I'm not giving up my backup to another team that's desperate unless they're going to pay out. And the Vikings have made it clear, and Kevin O'Connell talked about it today, that they are keeping one eye on the present and one eye on the future. And I think Josh Dobbs helps them do both of those things at once.
You mentioned the offensive line. Another move for the Vikings today, trading Ezra Cleveland to the Jacksonville Jaguars, 6th-round pick getting back for the Vikings. What does that mean for the Vikings offensive line, which has played pretty dang well this season? Dalton Reiser now taking over at that left guard role the past couple games. Seems like he's going to be there now for the rest of the season. Is he here for the next couple seasons as well? They're going to sign him in the offseason, or are we back into guard searching during the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, the theme is once again the competitive rebuild mentality, where if you were aiming for a Super Bowl this year, you thought that that could happen. And maybe if Kirk Cousins doesn't get hurt, they start to get a little more convinced about their chances and they don't trade away Ezra Cleveland, because you would want as much depth there as you could possibly get. But considering the circumstances and considering their eyes are on the future, Ezra Cleveland was set to be an unrestricted free agent. And instead of waiting around to get a compensatory pick in 2025, then you get it right away for next draft. And every little bit helps when you might have to trade up under certain circumstances, or even just get another player to potentially develop late in the draft when you know you're not going to extend someone. Where this move is interesting is probably in Jacksonville, because Ezra Cleveland was grading very well by Pro Football Focus, in the top 10 in guards, in fact, which was by far his best year. But I think that the Vikings never truly bought into that and maybe wanted a little more of a physical presence, which they brought in Dalton Reisner. He's played pretty well. The first game I thought was excellent against San Francisco, could not have been better, and maybe a little worn down against Green Bay, but still, solid and competent play along the offensive line. They've gelled together. And on the right guard, because you could say, well, bring back Cleveland, slide Reisner over, but they want to give Ed Ingram an opportunity to continue to develop. This year has been better. It has not been all pro, but it has been an improvement. Whether you look at the PFF numbers or just use your eye test, there's a lot fewer huge mistakes than there were from last year, and offensive linemen take a while to progress. So if there's any belief that he can become a good player, you want to give him that opportunity. And with Reisner, you also want to have a chance there, as you mentioned, to re-sign him, having him in the building, in the culture. We know from the NFLPA survey that players really enjoy playing for the Minnesota Vikings. It gives you a leg up on potentially keeping him if they like what they've seen.
Lastly, the Vikings didn't make some key moves, which have been speculated the past couple weeks. Danielle Hunter stays, KJ Osborn stays. What does that say about their thought process for this season? And what do they do with Danielle Hunter in the offseason, who's set to become an unrestricted free agent?
Yeah, I think from a black and white Excel sheet perspective, it was probably a better idea to trade Danielle Hunter, because look at what Montez Sweat got back. Hunter is a better player than Sweat. They're fairly close in age. So you're talking most likely a second round pick, if not something even more than that, for someone as good as Danielle Hunter. However, the theme of this thing is you have to give them a chance. The players went from 0-3 to 4-4. They are in this playoff race. And if you take away one of their best players, one of the 5 best players on this football team, then inside the locker room, that's a pretty tough message to sell, right? Like, hey guys, we're not giving up on this season, but the second round pick's pretty helpful for next year. That's a hard one to sell. It's also hard to sell to Brian Flores, who has schemed his tail off and has coached his tail off to get this team over the last month in the top 5. And I know they've had some easy opponents, but they've made life hellacious on those quarterbacks that they've gone against over this last month. So in keeping Danielle Hunter, they give themselves a chance to make the playoffs, to get the most out of this defense. And yes, they're giving up a potential draft pick. If he does leave, they will get that in a comp pick at some point. But also, like Dalton Reisner we talked about, it gives them an opportunity to potentially re-sign him. Danielle Hunter could not have done more under this regime to show Kevin O'Connell, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, etc., that he deserves top dollar. I mean, he's leading the entire league in sacks. And last year, he had a tremendous season as well. They couldn't ask for much more from him. So if there's anybody that I think a lot of Vikings fans would get on board for keeping long-term, it's probably Danielle Hunter. And I think having now 2 seasons with no injuries and things like that, maybe there's a much better argument for re-signing him. This still leaves the door open for that.
That's been another Purple Insider Extra for Bring Me the Sports. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the Purple Insider Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Talk to you next time.